How do you deal with someone who expects everything and gives nothing in return? During a dinner celebrating us signing a lease on a brand new home, my wife dropped the bomb that she was quitting her job. "I want to be a trad wife," she said out of the blue. I thought it was a joke, until she pulled up her Instagram where she had already made an extensive post about how amazing of a husband I was for agreeing to work 2 jobs to pay for the mortgage. The next morning, Katie quit her nursing job with no notice. By the end of the week, she'd gone full traditional, wouldn't drive, wouldn't work, wouldn't make financial decisions. She also wouldn't answer the door for deliveries, claiming that was a man's job, so my expensive work equipment got stolen off our porch. Then she refused to sign for my certified mail from the IRS about a tax audit because traditional wives don't handle business matters. I got fined $8,000 for missing the deadline. Then my brother got into a severe car accident 40 minutes away. Single dad, his kids were at school and needed to be picked up in 2 hours. He was unconscious, and I was stuck in a mandatory meeting at work that I'd be fired for leaving. "Katie, please, just this once. Pick up the kids from school and drive them to the hospital." "Traditional wives don't drive," she said, arranging flowers she'd picked from our garden. "It's not feminine. They're 8 and 10 years old. They'll be standing outside school alone. Maybe their mother should have thought about that before divorcing your brother." My brother's kids waited outside their school until child services picked them up. The investigation lasted months. He nearly lost custody because of child abandonment while he was literally in a coma. I remember begging her to stop. She could be traditional and still use her frontal lobe. But nope. Because 2 weeks later, our house caught fire. She was in the kitchen and left the stove on by accident. The extinguisher was literally in the corner next to her, but instead of grabbing it, she ran outside and called me. Traditional wives don't handle emergencies. That's the man's job. By the time firefighters arrived, half the kitchen was destroyed. $20,000 in damages. Insurance investigated why she didn't attempt to put out a containable fire, and our premiums tripled. That was when I finally snapped. "You want traditional? Fine." She gleamed with excitement until I opened our banking app. "I'm closing your access to our joint account." Her head snapped up. "What?" "Traditional wives don't have their own bank accounts. They get allowances. My grandfather gave my grandmother $10 a week in 1960. Adjusted for inflation, that's $100 a month. That's insane. That's traditional." That evening, she was planning a Friday night out with the girls. Apparently, that's traditional. "I'll need an Uber to downtown, probably $30 each way." Traditional wives don't go to bars without their husbands. That's inappropriate. It's just drinks with friends. My grandmother never went anywhere without my grandfather after 6 p.m., very traditional. She ended up canceling. Her father's 70th birthday was the next weekend. Her whole family had planned a surprise party for months. But when Saturday came, I had to work. "I can't take you," I said. "So you can't go." She had no car and missed it. Her father cried when he realized she wasn't coming. Her mother called her selfish. When Katie's grandmother was dying in hospice, Katie came to me crying. "Please, I need money for an Uber just this once. She's asking for me." "Traditional wives don't handle money," I reminded her. "You said modern women's financial independence destroyed marriages. Remember your Instagram post?" Her grandmother died a 30-minute drive away while Katie sat at home. Then her brother's wedding invitation arrived. Destination wedding in Mexico. Katie begged for her passport renewal fee. "It's only $150. Please, he's my only sibling." Traditional wives don't travel without their husbands. "I can't go, so neither can you. You said a woman's place is in the home." She missed the wedding. Katie's nursing license was soon expiring. She sobbed, holding the renewal notice. "Please, just $500 for the continuing education courses. I worked 7 years for this license." Traditional wives don't have careers. You quit your job to be traditional, remember? Why would you need a license? When Katie found a breast lump, the free clinic had 1 cancellation. She called me at work, hysterical. "Please come get me and drive me there right now." Traditional wives wait for their husbands' schedules. "You posted that modern women are too independent, always putting their needs first. This could be cancer. Then we'll go next month when I'm free." She waited 6 weeks. It was cancer. The night before her surgery, she finally broke. I watched our house burn. I let kids go to foster care. I missed everyone's death. I might die myself. For what? For a lifestyle blog? "You wanted traditional," I reminded her. "When you posted about being a real wife while my brother's kids were being taken by CPS, this is what you wanted." The terror in her eyes was priceless. She had no idea what I was about to do. I spent that whole night at my computer while Katie slept. My laptop screen hurt my eyes after hours of scrolling through her Instagram. I took screenshots of every single post she'd made about being traditional. The one about wives not handling emergencies sat next to photos of our burned kitchen. Her post about feminine submission went right beside the IRS penalty notice for $8,000. I saved the letter from CPS about my brother's kids being taken into custody. Every receipt from the fire damage got scanned and added to my growing folder. My hands didn't shake anymore as I organized months of disasters into neat digital files. The evidence filled 3 separate folders on my desktop. Each screenshot had a date and a description of what it cost us. By 2 a.m., I couldn't look at another photo of her smiling face talking about traditional values while our life burned down around us. I opened my email and started typing to Joe Marston, a divorce attorney my coworker had used. My fingers moved fast across the keyboard as I explained the situation and asked for an emergency meeting. I attached a sample of the evidence and requested help protecting myself from more financial damage. The email went out at 2:47 a.m., and I felt something shift in my chest. This was really happening. I was done playing her games. The alarm went off at 5:30, and Katie rolled over, nervous about her surgery. I got up and made coffee like nothing had changed. My phone rang at 6 a.m. sharp. The pre-op nurse needed to confirm consent forms and payment arrangements for Katie's surgery. I told her Katie would be handling all her own medical decisions and paperwork today. The nurse went quiet on the other end. She asked if everything was okay between us. I explained that Katie insisted on being independent for these matters now. The nurse said she understood and would prepare the forms for Katie to complete herself. An hour later, I drove Katie to the hospital without saying a word. She kept looking at me, waiting for me to ask how she was feeling or tell her everything would be okay. I just kept my eyes on the road and my hands on the wheel. The radio played some morning talk show, and neither of us changed the station. When we got to the hospital, I parked and walked to the entrance without opening her door for her. She followed behind me, confused but not saying anything yet. Inside the hospital lobby, she stood next to me at the check-in desk. The receptionist smiled and asked for the patient's name. Katie waited for me to speak like I always did at her appointments. I just scrolled through my phone, checking work emails. After an awkward pause, Katie gave her name in a small voice. The receptionist handed her a clipboard full of forms. Katie looked at me again, but I was already walking to a chair in the waiting area. She sat down next to me with all the paperwork. Her hands shook as she filled out the insurance information. She had to ask me for our policy number, and I showed her my phone screen without comment. Page after page of medical history and consent forms. She kept stopping to read parts she didn't understand. The surgical consent form made her pause the longest. All those risks listed in small print. Complications from anesthesia, possible infections. She had to initial next to each one. For months, she'd refused to sign anything because traditional wives don't handle business matters. Now she signed her name over and over while I sat beside her playing a game on my phone. When they called her back for prep, she asked if I was coming with her. I told her I had a meeting and would be back later. The look on her face was something between fear and understanding. They wheeled her away, and I left the hospital. Joe Marston's office was downtown in a tall glass building. His assistant brought me coffee while I waited in the conference room. Joe walked in carrying a legal pad and shook my hand firmly. He'd reviewed my email and the evidence I'd sent. We spent 2 hours going through everything. The IRS fine, the fire damage, the tripled insurance premiums, my brother's custody case. He took notes on everything and pulled up similar cases on his laptop. He said I had clear grounds for separation based on financial harm from negligent behavior. We started drafting the separation papers right there. He explained how we could partition our finances immediately to protect me from future damage. We discussed getting protective orders against any new liabilities she might create. The paperwork would be filed within the week. By the time I got back to the hospital, Katie's surgery was done. The surgeon found me in the waiting room and explained they got clean margins, but she'd need radiation and possibly chemo. I took notes on my phone while he talked. When he mentioned follow-up appointments, I made it clear Katie would be managing her own treatment schedule. The surgeon looked confused, but continued explaining the treatment timeline. He said she could go home tomorrow morning if everything looked good. I thanked him and went to the recovery room. Katie was awake but groggy from the medication. Her eyes focused on me slowly. I pulled a chair next to her bed and spoke clearly so she'd remember later. She needed to handle her own medical scheduling and transportation from now on, unless she asked for help directly, and dropped the traditional act completely. Her eyes got wide as she processed what I was saying through the drug haze. This wasn't about teaching her a lesson anymore. I was done enabling her fantasy that had destroyed so much. She started to cry, but I kept talking. The next morning, I met with Joe again to review our strategy. We'd file for legal separation immediately. Our joint accounts would be partitioned. The house would need to be sold to cover our debts. He showed me the timeline for everything and validated that the documented financial harm gave us a strong case. I left Joe's office and drove straight to my car to make the calls he suggested. The insurance company took 40 minutes to understand why I needed Katie removed from our policy authorization. I explained the fire damage and her refusal to use the extinguisher 3 times before they agreed to flag our account. The mortgage company was worse since both our names were on the loan. They couldn't remove her completely, but agreed to require dual authorization for any changes going forward. I sat in that parking garage for 2 hours making these calls while other cars came and went around me. My phone buzzed with a text from Katie showing a vintage housewife meme about standing by your man through thick and thin. I screenshot it and sent back 3 images in response. First was her Instagram post about traditional wives not handling emergencies. Second was the photo of our burned kitchen with visible char marks up the wall. Third was the $20,000 repair estimate from the contractor. She didn't reply for an hour, then just sent a confused face emoji. The next morning, Joe called to confirm he'd filed our separation paperwork with the court. We had a hearing date in 2 weeks for temporary orders about the house and finances. I spent that evening at my kitchen table with my laptop creating a detailed timeline of everything. The IRS audit notice dated March 3rd. Katie's refusal to sign dated March 5th. The $8,000 penalty letter dated April 10th. My brother's accident on April 22nd with timestamps from my phone calls. The CPS report dated April 23rd. The house fire on May 7th with the fire department report. The insurance claim denial letter questioning why Katie didn't attempt to contain the fire. Every disaster had dates and documentation and costs attached. I organized it all into a spreadsheet with columns for date, incident, Katie's action or inaction, and financial impact. The total damages came to over $40,000, not counting my brother's legal fees. My phone rang while I was adding up the numbers, and Peter Sloan from CPS introduced himself. He was handling my brother's custody case and needed my statement about the day of the accident. I pulled up my phone records showing 17 calls to Katie between noon and 3 p.m. that day. I explained how I was stuck in a mandatory meeting and begged her to pick up the kids. Peter asked if Katie had a medical condition preventing her from driving. I told him no, she just decided traditional wives don't drive. He was quiet for a long moment, then thanked me for the documentation. He said my phone records and testimony would help prove my brother wasn't negligent since he was unconscious in the hospital. The next day at work, my boss called me into his office and closed the door behind us. He had a folder on his desk with my name on it. The IRS audit had triggered a review of my work performance, and they'd found multiple missed deadlines over the past 3 months. He showed me emails I'd missed and projects that were late because I was dealing with Katie's disasters. He put me on a 90-day performance improvement plan with weekly check-ins. If I didn't meet every single deadline for 3 months, I'd be terminated. My professional reputation was crumbling because of Katie's traditional wife experiment. 2 days later, I drove Katie to her oncology consultation since she still refused to drive herself. Dr. Deepika Wright was a small woman with thick glasses who spoke very directly. She laid out Katie's treatment options on a whiteboard with specific timelines and requirements. 6 weeks of radiation starting immediately. Possible chemotherapy depending on genetic testing results. Monthly blood work for 5 years. Katie kept looking at me to ask questions, but I just took notes silently on my phone. Dr. Wright noticed and addressed Katie directly about taking responsibility for her treatment schedule. Katie's hands shook as she tried to write down the appointment dates. When the billing coordinator came in to discuss payment arrangements, Katie froze completely. She turned to me with panic in her eyes, but I kept typing notes on my phone. The coordinator asked Katie directly about insurance authorization and payment plans. Dr. Wright interrupted to firmly state that Katie needed to authorize her own treatment plan and sign her own financial agreements. Katie's voice cracked as she asked about payment options. The coordinator explained everything while Katie fumbled with the paperwork. Her traditional wife persona was slamming into medical reality where she couldn't hide behind me. That evening, I called 3 therapists before finding one with an opening. Ayanna Beck could see me in 2 days for an intake appointment. I explained briefly that I was dealing with anger about my marriage situation. She asked if I was safe and if anyone else was in danger. I told her I wasn't going to hurt anyone, but I could feel my anger getting darker. During our first session, I told her everything while she took notes. She helped me see the difference between setting boundaries and being cruel. She said protecting myself financially and legally was appropriate, but I needed to watch for vindictive behavior. I admitted part of me wanted Katie to suffer like she'd made others suffer. Ayanna said that was normal, but I couldn't let it control my actions. The next night, Katie's mother called me sobbing and asking why Katie missed her father's birthday and her grandmother's death. Instead of explaining, I opened Katie's Instagram and forwarded 5 posts to her mother. The post about traditional wives not traveling without husbands. The post about a woman's place being in the home. The post about modern women being too independent. Her mother called back an hour later after reading everything and just said she understood now. 3 days after Katie's surgery, she had a follow-up appointment scheduled for wound check and drainage removal. The morning of the appointment, she called me asking for a ride. I reminded her she could take an Uber. She said traditional wives don't take rides with strange men. I told her the appointment was her responsibility. The clinic called me that afternoon saying Katie missed her appointment. I gave them her number and told them to contact her directly. They said missing post-op appointments could affect her recovery and insurance coverage. I repeated they should call her directly. Katie got a warning letter about treatment compliance 2 days later. 2 weeks later, Zhao filed the paperwork for temporary financial control of our house. He attached photos of the burned kitchen that looked worse than I remembered. The charred cabinets and melted countertops told the whole story. He included the $8,000 IRS penalty notice and the tripled insurance premiums. The filing was 60 pages of evidence showing Katie's choices had cost us over $40,000. That same afternoon, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Someone had screenshot my comment about the $100 monthly allowance and posted it on Twitter. The post went viral within hours. My inbox filled with messages calling me a monster. People said I was financially abusing my sick wife. They didn't know about the burned kitchen or my brother's kids in foster care. The irony hit hard as I scrolled through hundreds of comments defending Katie's right to money she'd refused to earn. My next therapy session with Ayanna was rough. She pushed me to think about what help I could actually give Katie without enabling her. We went back and forth for 20 minutes. She kept asking what I'd do if Katie dropped the traditional act completely. I finally admitted I could drive her to treatments if she asked directly. No games, no traditional wife talk, just a simple request for help. Ayana wrote that down and made me repeat it. We agreed on boundaries that let me be human without being a doormat. That night, I typed out a formal email to Katie. I kept it short and clear. I would drive her to cancer treatments if she booked them herself and asked me directly. No mention of traditional roles or gender duties. Just a straightforward request and I'd help. I sent it and waited. 3 days passed with no response. Then Thursday morning, my phone dinged with a text. I have an appointment Thursday at 2 p.m. Can you please drive me? That was it. No traditional wife stuff. No manipulation. Just a simple question. I texted back yes and picked her up at 1:30 without saying much. The drive was quiet but not hostile. At the hospital, the billing department wanted a $5,000 deposit for her treatment plan. Katie sat there staring at the paperwork for 10 minutes. The clerk kept asking about payment options. Katie's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. She called her father right there in the billing office. I heard her admit she had no money and needed help. Her voice cracked when she explained about the treatments. It was the first honest conversation she'd had with family in months. Her father agreed to wire the money. The next week was my brother's custody hearing. I took the morning off work to testify about the day of his accident. The judge asked specific questions about my phone calls and Katie's refusal to help. I showed my call logs from that day. 23 calls to Katie while the kids waited at the school. The judge looked at the timeline and shook his head. He acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances of my brother being in a coma. My brother got his kids back, but the damage was done. His 10-year-old still had nightmares about being taken away. Family dinners stayed tense with everyone avoiding Katie's name. Meanwhile, the insurance company sent another premium increase notice. We couldn't afford to keep the house with rates that high. I called 3 realtors and picked one who could list it fast. The walkthrough was depressing. The realtor pointed out smoke damage I hadn't noticed before. Gray streaks ran up the walls in every room near the kitchen. The smell of smoke still lingered in the carpets. She said we'd need to price it low to move it quickly. Every room held evidence of that day. Katie watched it burn. The realtor took photos, while I tried not to think about the equity we'd lose. 2 days after the listing went live, Katie showed up at my apartment. She asked quietly if I'd reconsider the separation if she dropped the whole traditional thing. Said she'd go to counseling and get a job again. Her voice was different, smaller somehow. I told her the damage went too deep. Trust doesn't just come back because someone says sorry. She nodded like she finally understood that consequences don't disappear. Some things break and stay broken. That week in therapy, Ayana made me face something hard. She asked if part of me had wanted to punish Katie, not just protect myself. I sat there for a long time before answering. Yeah, part of me wanted her to hurt like she'd hurt others. I wanted her to feel what my brother's kids felt, what her grandmother felt dying alone. Ayana didn't judge, but she made me own it. I had to admit my own capacity for cruelty. The difference was I could see it and work on it. Growth meant acknowledging that shadow side while keeping boundaries. Katie started deactivating her social media accounts one by one. First Instagram, where all the traditional wife posts lived, then Facebook and Twitter. Her whole online identity disappeared in days. The influence she'd built up over months just gone. No explanation to her followers. No goodbye post. Just deleted like it never happened. Her followers started messaging me directly, asking why she was suddenly driving herself to doctor appointments when just weeks ago she posted about how driving wasn't feminine. I blocked them all without responding. Katie spent hours at her laptop that week, deleting years of content from every platform she'd ever used. Pinterest boards about homemaking vanished. YouTube videos about submission disappeared. Her whole online identity crumbled in less than a week. 3 weeks later, we sat in the courthouse for our temporary orders hearing. The judge reviewed my stack of evidence while Katie sat there with no lawyer and no preparation. He looked at the fire damage photos, the IRS penalty notice, and the insurance premium increases. He granted me control over the mortgage and all insurance policies, but denied my request for immediate spousal support from her. Katie would need to prove she was actively seeking work before any support orders could be considered. It was a partial win that still left me carrying most of our debt alone. The next morning, Katie had another appointment with Dr. Wright about her treatment plan. The oncologist laid out 6 months of additional therapy with specific dates and requirements. She warned Katie that missing even one appointment could affect her recovery. The doctor didn't sugarcoat anything. She explained that compliance meant showing up on time, every time, no excuses. Katie's face went pale as she realized this wasn't something she could quit when it got hard. That afternoon, Katie's mother called me. She said Katie could move into her spare room, but only with strict conditions. Katie would have to drive herself everywhere, manage her own medications, and help with household chores. No sitting around arranging flowers while other people handled real life. Katie accepted immediately since she had nowhere else to go. Her mother's rules killed any chance of continuing her traditional wife fantasy. I met with Zhao at his office that Friday to draft a settlement proposal. I offered to absorb all the house debt and the entire IRS fine if Katie would agree to a quick divorce and give up any alimony claims. It would cost me almost everything, but would buy my freedom from this mess. Zhao sent the offer with a 1-week deadline for response. Katie called Zhao's office the next day, demanding spousal support anyway. She thought she deserved half of everything despite causing all our losses. Zhao explained the real numbers based on her voluntary unemployment and my destroyed credit. He showed her case law about people who quit jobs without cause. Her expectations crashed hard against legal reality. She'd imagined getting thousands per month while I paid for everything. Instead, she might get a few hundred at most, and only if she could prove she was looking for work. My performance review deadline was coming up fast. I submitted a request for intermittent family leave to cover only essential medical transportation for Katie. My boss approved it, but made it clear he wasn't happy. He reminded me that my work had suffered for months. My career was hanging by a thread, another casualty of Katie's choices. The next week, Katie went to the hospital to update her paperwork. She named her mother as her primary healthcare proxy and changed her emergency contacts. I was still listed, but only as a secondary contact. It was a small step, but the first time she'd taken responsibility for her own medical decisions. Peter Sloan called me with an update about my brother's custody case. The kids were doing better in therapy, and the case was finally moving toward closure. The foster care nightmare would end soon, though the trauma would last much longer. My nephew still asked why Aunt Katie wouldn't help them that day. He couldn't understand why she let them get taken away. The realtor called that same afternoon with an offer on the house. It was $20,000 below our asking price. Given the fire damage and insurance problems, we had no choice but to accept. After paying off the mortgage and the IRS fine, the remaining equity would barely cover moving costs and security deposits. 8 years of payments gone because Katie wanted to play house on Instagram. Katie started going to a cancer support group at the community center every Tuesday night. I drove her there the 3rd week when she asked without the traditional wife stuff. The facilitator made everyone go around and share why they were really there, not just the cancer part, but what brought them to that room. Katie sat there for 20 minutes listening to other people talk about their real fears and regrets. When it was her turn, she stared at her hands and told them about quitting her nursing job to become an influencer. She explained how she'd let my brother's kids get taken by child services because driving wasn't feminine enough. She admitted she watched our kitchen burn instead of grabbing the fire extinguisher 10 feet away. The other patients just stared at her. One woman asked if she was serious. Katie nodded and kept talking about missing her grandmother's death and her brother's wedding. The facilitator stopped her and asked what she was really running from. Katie finally said she'd been burned out from nursing and scared of failing at her job, so she created this fantasy where she didn't have to work or make decisions. The group didn't let her off easy. They asked about the kids who went to foster care. They asked about the house fire. They asked how many people she'd hurt. Katie cried through most of it, but she kept going back every week. I found our wedding rings in the jewelry box that night and packed them in a small cardboard box with our marriage certificate. I sat at my computer and typed out a letter explaining everything, from the first Instagram post to the cancer diagnosis. The letter went through 8 drafts before I realized it didn't matter what I wrote. Actions had already said everything. I saved it to my desktop and never printed it. The next morning, Zhao called about scheduling mediation. Katie's lawyer wanted everything settled quickly and quietly. Both attorneys insisted on a complete social media blackout as part of the agreement. No posts, no comments, no mentions of the divorce or why it happened. Katie would have to delete all her traditional wife content and close her influencer accounts. She agreed without fighting it. The mediation got scheduled for the following Monday at Zhao's office downtown. I spent the weekend organizing every receipt, every screenshot, every piece of evidence into a timeline. The IRS penalty notice went first, then the fire damage estimate, then the CPS reports from Peter about my brother's case. I printed emails from my boss about my performance review. I had photos of the burned kitchen and the insurance claim denial. Everything got sorted by date with sticky notes explaining the cost of each disaster. Monday morning, we sat across from each other at a conference table while the mediator reviewed our assets and debts. I presented my timeline without any emotion, just reading dates and dollar amounts. Katie didn't interrupt or argue. She sat there looking at the photos of our burned kitchen. The mediator asked if she disputed any of the facts. She shook her head. We moved through each issue systematically. The house sale would close in 3 weeks. After paying the mortgage and the IRS fine, we'd have about $2,000 left. Katie agreed to take $500 for moving expenses. She needed health insurance for her treatment, so we worked out keeping her on my plan for 6 more months. The COBRA payments would cost her almost $1,000 a month once she got a job. Keeping her on my insurance only cost me an extra $200. It made financial sense even though I didn't want to help her. The mediator typed up each agreement as we went. Katie would waive all spousal support claims. I would cover the remaining house debt and tax penalties. She would take her personal items and her car. We'd split the checking account down the middle. The session almost fell apart when Katie looked at me and said I'd enjoyed watching her suffer. The mediator tried to redirect, but I told them both that yes, for a while I did enjoy it. After what she did to my brother's kids, after the fire, after missing the tax deadline, watching her face consequences felt like justice. But I was tired of being angry. The hate was eating me up worse than the cancer was eating her. We could either keep destroying each other or just end it. Katie nodded, and we went back to dividing furniture. The settlement agreement took 4 hours to finalize. Every detail got spelled out with specific dates and responsibilities. Who would handle which utility cancellation, when the house keys got turned over, how we'd manage the closing. Zhao reviewed it and said it was one of the cleanest separations he'd handled. When both people just wanted out, paperwork moved fast. We signed everything that afternoon. Thursday, I helped Katie load 2 boxes into my car to take to her mother's house. She'd packed her clothes and some books. Everything else stayed with the house for staging. Her mother met us at the curb and took the boxes without saying much. She thanked me for driving them over. Katie walked inside without looking back. No goodbye, no tears, just the end of 8 years. Her mother called me later to say Katie was handling her own medical appointments and driving herself everywhere now. Friday afternoon, my phone rang while I was at work. Dr. Wright's number showed on the screen. She left a voicemail about concerning margins from Katie's surgery that needed follow-up within 2 weeks. The scheduling window was tight. Katie called me an hour later. She'd already talked to the doctor and understood what needed to happen. She asked real questions about recovery time and treatment options. She'd booked the surgery for next Thursday and wondered if I could drive her. She said she could take an Uber, but would feel safer with someone she knew. No manipulation, no traditional wife garbage, just an honest request. I told her I'd drive her if she kept it simple. Thursday morning, I picked her up at her mother's house at 6:30. She didn't say anything during the drive, and neither did I. The surgery went fine, and they removed the concerning tissue with clean margins this time. I dropped her back at her mother's house and drove straight to work for my performance review. My boss sat across from me with a folder full of documentation about missed deadlines and the days I'd taken off. He acknowledged the personal crisis, but said the company needed consistency going forward. The review came back as satisfactory, which meant I kept my job, but would be on monitoring for 6 months. It wasn't ideal, but at least I had stable income to rebuild my life. 3 weeks later, the house closing finally happened at the title company downtown. The buyers showed up with their realtor, and we signed page after page of documents. After paying off the mortgage and the $8,000 IRS penalty, we had just enough left for security deposits on separate apartments. 8 years of equity completely gone, but at least we were free of shared debt. The financial freedom felt worth every penny we'd lost. Katie signed her portion of the papers without looking at me once. The divorce hearing was scheduled for the following month at the courthouse. When the day came, we both showed up with our lawyers and waited in the hallway for our case number to be called. The judge reviewed our settlement agreement and asked if we both understood what we were signing. We said yes, and he signed the decree right there in the courtroom. It was exactly 6 months after Katie had announced she wanted to be a traditional wife at that dinner. The legal end felt empty after everything we'd destroyed getting here. We were both poorer but supposedly wiser, though I wasn't sure about the wiser part yet. Katie's mother called me a few weeks later to let me know Katie had finished her cancer treatment successfully. She was going to therapy every week now to figure out why she'd blown up our life for Instagram likes. Her mother said she was actually following through with appointments and taking it seriously. It was the consistency she'd never shown during our entire marriage. I thanked her for the update and hung up. I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment near my office the next month. The place was basic but clean, with just enough room for my stuff and a small desk to work from. I started new routines that didn't involve managing chaos or checking if Katie had burned down another kitchen. Therapy continued every 2 weeks with Ayana, helping me process the anger and figure out how to build something healthier. My life felt boring in the best possible way. No drama, no disasters, just normal days. My brother brought his kids over for pizza and video games on a Saturday afternoon about 2 months after the divorce. We ordered pepperoni and played Mario Kart on my new TV while eating on paper plates. It was our first normal evening since his accident, almost a year ago. We didn't talk about that terrible day when Katie refused to pick up the kids from the school. Some wounds heal better with silence and time passing. The kids seemed happy, and that was all that mattered. My nephew beat me at every race and laughed when I pretended to be mad about it. 3 months after the divorce, an email showed up in my inbox from Katie's new email address. It was short and direct, just a few sentences. She wrote that she was driving herself everywhere now and managing all her own appointments. She said she'd been wrong about everything and thanked me for not letting her die from her own stupidity. I didn't respond, but I saved the email in a folder. Part of me wanted to write back, but there wasn't anything left to say. The last administrative tasks came up about a month later when I remembered we still had shared cloud storage and a few joint accounts we'd forgotten about. I spent an afternoon deleting old photos from our cloud account and closing the savings account we'd opened for a vacation we never took. Each click felt like erasing another piece of our marriage from existence. The anger had faded into indifference by then. Life moved forward without her, simpler and calmer than anything I'd experienced in years. My days became predictable in a good way. Work, gym, therapy, seeing my brother and his kids on weekends. No more Instagram posts about being traditional, no more refusing to handle basic adult tasks, no more watching everything burn while she stood there claiming it wasn't feminine to help. Just quiet mornings with coffee, and evenings watching TV without worrying what disaster would happen next. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. It's definitely been a journey worth sharing. Until we meet again, folks. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.